"Don't move," the man shouted, his voice echoing through the metal corridor. A piercing light from his blaster cut through the smoke, casting long shadows across the walls. The alien girl cowered behind a broken crate, her glowing blue eyes wide with terror. The raiders were closing in, their heavy boots pounding like thunder on the floor. Kane's pulse raced, but his focus was sharp. He had faced death before, yet nothing had ever felt this urgent. The girl, fragile, trembling, and utterly human in her fear, was counting on him. He leapt over the crate, firing twice. 2 raiders fell, and the others hesitated. That moment gave him just enough time. "Come on, this way," he urged, grabbing her hand. Her skin was cool and soft, almost ethereal, like nothing he had ever touched. She didn't speak, she couldn't. Her voice had been silenced by months of captivity, but her eyes screamed gratitude and hope. Kane knew he couldn't fail, not now. The ship ride out of the raider stronghold was silent except for the hum of the engines. The girl, still shivering, finally whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was faint, trembling, yet something inside Kane tightened. He had rescued countless lives in his career, but this felt different. She was not just another mission. She was a life he had saved with his own hands, a life that now seemed inexplicably tied to his. Years passed. Kane returned to Earth, missions pulling him across distant galaxies, but memories of that moment never faded. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she had survived. In his mind, she remained that frightened, fragile girl, the one he had pulled from the edge of death. He never imagined the universe would weave their fates together again. Then one quiet evening, the message arrived. The communication screen flickered to life, displaying a figure that made Kane's heart catch in his chest. She had grown, tall, poised, and breathtakingly regal. Her eyes were the same luminous blue, but now they held a depth of power and wisdom he could barely comprehend. "I am Princess Leora," she said, her voice steady but layered with emotion, "and I owe my life to you." Kane stared at the screen, a mixture of awe and disbelief tightening his chest. The girl he had saved from a raider ambush was now royalty on a distant world. The faint trembling of her hands as she lowered them to her sides betrayed the composure of a princess. This was not just a political message. This was personal. I don't understand," Kane said slowly, gripping the edge of his desk. "Why now? Why tell me this?" "Because," Leora's voice cracked slightly, almost imperceptibly, "I need you, Kane. I cannot face what comes next alone." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken memories and unresolved emotions. Kane's mind raced. Duty pulled him back to Earth, to responsibilities he could not abandon. Yet something in her plea, the desperation, the hope, stirred a part of him he thought long dead. "You saved me once," she continued, her eyes locking onto the camera as if piercing through time and space itself. "Now, I am asking you, don't leave me again." Kane felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. The universe had offered him a choice, one that could change not just the fate of a princess, but perhaps the balance of entire worlds. He had walked away once before, thinking the galaxy's dangers were his only concern. But staring at Leora now, he realized some debts could never be repaid by silence or distance. The corridor outside his office felt colder than the vacuum of space. His hand hovered over the communicator controls, indecision biting at him. For the first time, Kane wondered if heroism meant more than survival, if saving a life once demanded loyalty forever. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Because Leora was not just a princess. She was a force that would test him, challenge him, and demand everything he had left. And Kane was about to learn that sometimes the people we save do not just need rescuing, they change our destiny entirely. Kane's ship cut through the stars, leaving the familiar constellations of Earth behind. The control panel glowed softly, reflecting in his dark eyes. He had made his decision. Despite the risks, despite the unknown, he was going to see her, Princess Leora, the girl he had once saved, now a sovereign in a galaxy he barely recognized. When the ship finally entered orbit around Leora's planet, Kane felt his chest tighten. From above, the world was breathtaking. Emerald forests stretched like rivers across violet plains, massive cities shimmered with golden lights, and structures floated above rivers of iridescent water. It was beautiful, alien, alive, and he thought of her standing at the heart of it all. The landing pad shimmered as he stepped out, the air filled with a faint hum of energy. His boots echoed on the polished surface, and for a moment he felt like an intruder in a world that had moved on without him. Then he saw her. Leora. She descended the grand staircase leading from the palace, her emerald green gown catching the sunlight. Every step she took was regal, controlled, perfect. But when her eyes met Kane's, all her composure melted. In that instant, she was the girl he had pulled from the raider's clutches, trembling in his arms, seeking safety. Now she was a queen, yet still vulnerable, still human. "Kane," she whispered, barely audible over the ceremonial music that heralded his arrival. Her voice was both command and plea, layered with unspoken memories. "You came." "I promised I would," he replied, his own voice rough, unused to this kind of confrontation. He took a step closer, aware of the gap between them, between a hero and the person he saved, between past and present. They entered the palace together, and Kane's breath caught. The hall was enormous, adorned with golden carvings that glowed faintly, chandeliers that hung like constellations, and walls that seemed to hum with power. Nobles and dignitaries lined the hall, their eyes fixed on Leora as she led him forward. Kane felt their scrutiny, but it was nothing compared to the weight of her gaze. Finally, she stopped at the center of the hall. Kane could see the subtle tremble in her hands, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her shoulders stiffened as if carrying the weight of her entire kingdom. "I owe you more than words can say," she began, her voice steady now but lined with raw emotion. "When you saved me, I had no hope. I had no future, but because of you, I survived. I became more than I ever imagined, but I cannot face what comes next without you." Kane wanted to respond, to tell her that he had always survived on his own, that he had faced death countless times. Yet when he looked at her, he saw a lifetime of pain and strength entwined, and he knew that no words could explain it. She wasn't asking him to save her this time. She was asking him to stay. Before he could speak, the palace doors opened abruptly. A council of alien nobles entered, their faces unreadable, their eyes sharp. Kane felt the weight of political tension pressing down on him. Leora's rise had not been easy, and not everyone in her court welcomed a human who had saved her years ago. Whispers followed them, sharp and cold. "Kane of Earth," one of the council members said, voice echoing through the hall, "your presence here is unusual. The princess's safety is assured. Why intervene again?" Leora's hand tightened on his arm. "Because," she said, voice low but unwavering, "he is not here for politics. He is here because he is part of my life, part of my past and my future." Kane swallowed hard, realizing that stepping onto her world meant more than a visit. Every eye in the hall was on him. Every whisper could turn into a challenge. Every decision he made could affect not just Leora, but the balance of power on this planet. Yet all he could think about was the girl he had once rescued. The girl who was now a princess. The girl who, despite everything, had begged him not to leave again. And Kane knew in that quiet, tense moment that he could not turn back. Not now, not ever. As the council continued their silent scrutiny, Kane and Leora stood together in the center of the hall, two souls bound by fate, history, and an unspoken promise. Outside, the alien world stretched endlessly, full of wonder and danger. Inside, their shared past pulsed between them, a tether stronger than any royal decree, stronger than any mission. Somehow, Kane understood that this was only the beginning. Leora's world was vast, full of secrets, enemies, and tests of loyalty. And he was about to discover just how deeply intertwined his fate was with hers. The council chambers were colder than Kane expected, despite the warm, golden light spilling from the towering windows. Alien nobles, draped in iridescent fabrics and jeweled insignias, surrounded them in a semicircle. Each face was carved with skepticism, some with open disdain. Kane could feel their thoughts pressing against him. A human, a stranger, daring to step into the heart of their world. Princess Leora stood beside him, her hand barely brushing his. Kane noticed the subtle tremble in her fingers. Royalty could be poised, commanding, untouchable. But she was still the same girl he had saved years ago, vulnerable, fierce, and deeply human. "You may think your presence honors the princess," a tall noble said, voice sharp as crystal, "but it also undermines our sovereignty. How can we trust one who belongs to another world?" Kane's jaw tightened. He had faced worse than political intrigue before, yet this tension was different. These were not soldiers to be defeated with weapons. These were minds to be read, alliances to be navigated, hearts to be convinced. "I am here," Kane said slowly, "because I promised Leora I would never leave her again. I am not here to interfere, only to support. She asked me to stay." A murmur ran through the chamber. Leora's eyes softened, a mixture of gratitude and relief. For a fleeting moment, Kane saw the weight she carried, the expectations, the threats, the isolation of power. And he understood that her plea was not just for protection. It was for connection, for a lifeline in a world that demanded perfection from her every breath. Before the tension could escalate further, a sudden alarm echoed through the palace. Red lights flashed, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Kane instinctively moved toward Leora, protective instinct sharpening every sense. "Raiders," the guard commander said, his voice clipped. "They've breached the outer perimeter. They know you're here, Your Highness." Leora's face paled, but her posture remained rigid. "We prepared for this. Kane, stay close." Kane's heart pounded. He had faced raiders before, but this was different. These were not random attackers. They had found her. Somehow they had tracked the princess, the girl he had saved years ago, and now the danger had followed her into her palace. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos. Guards took positions, energy shields flickered into life, and Leora guided Kane toward a hidden passage. "This way," she commanded, voice steady, almost imperious, but Kane could see the fear behind her eyes. As they ran through the winding corridors, Kane glanced at her. The princess had become a leader, a symbol of hope for her people. But in this moment, she was simply human, her courage shining through fear, her trust in him absolute. "They won't stop until they take you," Kane said, gripping her arm. "We need a plan." Leora's eyes met his. "We will fight together. You've always been there. You know how." He hesitated, then nodded. It was true. The bond forged in the fires of a distant raid years ago had not faded. She trusted him with her life, and now that trust was a weapon stronger than any blade. They reached the palace's central control hub. Leora's fingers danced over the holographic panels, activating defenses, sealing exits, and calling loyal forces. Kane watched, amazed. The girl he had rescued had grown into a queen who commanded armies with the same precision he had once used in battle. And yet she still needed him, not as a tool, but as a partner, as the only one who could match her in understanding the cost of survival. The raiders arrived at the palace gates, and the first wave of energy blasts lit up the night sky. Kane stepped beside Leora, his military training instinctively taking over. "Stay close," he whispered. She did, her hand brushing his as they prepared to defend the palace together. Time seemed to slow as the battle began. Kane's mind flashed back to the day he first saved her. Then she had been fragile and terrified. Now she stood beside him, unbroken, defiant, yet still the girl who had begged him not to leave. And in that moment, Kane realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. He could fight armies, navigate galaxies, survive impossible odds, but he could not imagine surviving without her. Not now, not ever. As the first wave of attackers surged into the palace courtyard, Kane and Leora faced them together. Every movement, every command, every glance between them was a silent acknowledgement. The bond, forged in fear and survival, had grown into something unstoppable. Outside, the world burned in chaos. Inside, a man and the princess he once saved prepared to defend not just a throne, but the trust, the love, and the promise that had brought them together again. And Kane knew. This was only the beginning of a war that would test every limit of courage, loyalty, and the heart. The night air was thick with smoke and energy, the palace grounds lit by the erratic glow of plasma blasts. Kane moved with lethal precision, his blaster humming in rhythm with his heartbeat. At his side, Leora stood tall, her emerald gown now streaked with dust and sparks from the battle. She was regal, fierce, unyielding. But Kane noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the tight line of her jaw. Even as a princess, she was still human, still the girl who had once clung to him for safety. "They're not just raiders," Kane muttered, scanning the battlefield. "This is coordinated, someone sent them." Leora's eyes flicked to him, the faint glow of her emotions shining through. I feared as much, she said. Her voice was calm, but Kane could hear the undercurrent of worry. There are factions in my court, those who have never forgiven me for rising to power, for becoming more than they expected. They want me weak, exposed. Kane's mind raced. Political enemies were one thing, raiders from years ago were another. But this was a storm that combined both. Someone had learned of their bond, of the girl he had saved, and was using it as a weapon against her, against them. A deafening explosion shook the courtyard, sending a plume of fire into the night sky. Kane grabbed Leora, pulling her behind a reinforced barrier. Her hand brushed his, and for a heartbeat, everything else faded, the world, the battle, the politics. She looked at him with a mix of fear and trust, and Kane realized she had no one else in this moment. Not really. We can't hold them much longer, Kane said, voice low but urgent. You need to get inside the palace, safe rooms, evacuations, whatever you have. Leora shook her head, her eyes blazing with determination. I cannot leave my people, she said. Not when they need me, and not when you're here. Kane's chest tightened. He had faced impossible odds before, but the stubborn courage in her voice, it stirred something deep within him. This was not just about saving a life anymore. This was about standing beside the person who had once changed his own. He activated the palace's defense turrets, energy beams slicing through the raider ranks. We make them regret this, he said, moving forward to intercept a group trying to breach the inner gates. Leora followed, her hands glowing faintly as she commanded palace forces, her royal authority turning soldiers into an unstoppable wall of strength. But then Kane saw it, a symbol etched on the raiders' armor. It was a mark from the gang that had captured Leora all those years ago. A chill ran down his spine. They had survived, reorganized, and now were targeting her specifically. Not for gold, not for power, but for revenge. Leora noticed his change in expression. What is it? She asked. They know you, he said, teeth clenched. They remember, and they will not stop until they have you or me. Her hand found his, gripping tightly. Kane felt the spark of connection between them, a lifeline in the chaos. Then we fight, she said, voice trembling just enough to remind him she was still human. Together. The battle raged, waves of attackers crashing against palace defenses. Kane moved like a force of nature, while Leora's presence inspired soldiers to fight with unmatched courage. But amidst the chaos, Kane began to notice something more troubling. The palace's own defenses were failing in ways they shouldn't. Doors that should have sealed were open. Turrets that should have fired were offline. Someone inside, Kane muttered, realization dawning. It's a betrayal. We're not just under attack, we've been set up. Leora's eyes widened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her regal composure. Who, she whispered, who would do this? Kane shook his head. I don't know yet, but I'll find out. Whoever it is, they'll regret it. As they moved deeper into the palace, Kane and Leora fought side by side, each step a test of endurance, each glance a reminder of their bond. Every gunshot, every clash of energy blades, every scream of the raiders pressed them closer together, forging a connection that neither distance nor time could sever. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum where the heart of the palace's power lay. Kane placed a hand on Leora's shoulder. Here, he said, we hold them here, no one comes through together. She nodded, her face a mixture of determination and fear. Together, she repeated. And in that single word, Kane felt the weight of the promise they shared, the promise that had begun years ago when he pulled her from the brink of death, and now demanded fulfillment in a world full of betrayal, danger, and impossible choices. Outside, the palace burned. Inside, two souls stood as one, prepared to face not just raiders, but the darkness within their own court, and the truth that would soon shake Leora's kingdom to its core. And Kane knew this. Saving her once was not enough. Now he had to survive and protect her from the enemy that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The palace corridors were eerily quiet now. Smoke still curled through the air from the earlier battle, but the raiders had been pushed back, or so Kane hoped. Every shadow seemed sharper, every whisper of the wind a warning. Leora walked beside him, her posture still regal, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and worry. They were too precise, Kane muttered, scanning the hall with trained eyes. Every breach, every disabled defense, someone planned it from inside. Leora's hand found his, squeezing briefly. I feared as much, she admitted softly. There are those in my council who never accepted my rule. They have always resented my rise, my strength, my survival. Kane's jaw tightened. He had faced countless enemies across galaxies, but betrayal from within, someone who shared her bloodline, her trust, her court, was far more dangerous. It wasn't just a battle. It was a violation of everything they were trying to protect. They reached the palace's strategy chamber, a circular room lined with holographic displays of the city and the surrounding lands. Kane's eyes immediately caught the subtle blip on the perimeter sensors, a secondary entrance that hadn't been there before. They've prepared an escape route, he said, or a trap. Before Leora could respond, the chamber doors hissed open. A figure stepped inside, draped in the ceremonial robes of a high-ranking council member. Kane's heart sank. The emblem on their chest matched the one he had seen on the raiders. You were expecting me, Kane, the figure said, voice cold, emotionless. I see you've brought the princess with you. Leora stiffened. Traitor, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hand hovered near the small energy dagger at her belt, a ceremonial weapon, yes, but lethal in skilled hands. Kane stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Leora and the intruder. Explain, he demanded, his tone hard, precise. Who sent the raiders? Who's behind this? The council member smiled, a thin, cruel twist of lips. You think you understand power, princess? You think survival makes you strong? You were saved once, but not by everyone who claims loyalty. Some of us see the truth. You cannot rule alone, and the galaxy does not forgive weakness. Kane's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that they were in immediate danger, but he couldn't let fear show, not in front of Leora. He noticed how her eyes, normally fierce, flickered with doubt, the weight of years of trust now cracked by betrayal. This isn't about you, Kane said firmly. This is about survival. Your people depend on you, and I won't let anyone destroy that. Not you, not her, not this palace. The council members' laugh echoed through the chamber. You think a single man can stand against a kingdom's discontent, against centuries of ambition? You are naive, Kane of Earth. Suddenly alarms blared. More raiders, or perhaps loyalists turned traitors, were converging on the palace. Kane grabbed Leora's hand. We fight together, he said, voice low and urgent. Just like before, only this time it's not just survival, it's everything. She nodded, eyes flashing determination. Together, she echoed. And Kane felt it again. The connection forged in the heat of terror years ago, now tempered by experience, trust, and unspoken devotion. They moved as one, a storm of precision and courage. Kane's military training combined with Leora's strategic genius. Guards rallied around them, inspired by the sight of their princess refusing to falter, refusing to cower, refusing to let betrayal define her. The intruder moved to block their path, energy blade igniting with deadly intent. Kane met the strike, deflecting it with perfect timing. Leora struck simultaneously, her dagger flashing through the air, forcing the council member back. They were a seamless pair, two halves of a single unstoppable force, human courage meeting royal command. But the revelation weighed heavily on Kane. The betrayal within the court wasn't just a threat to Leora, it was a threat to the galaxy. Someone had planned this meticulously, using old grudges, old wounds, and the memory of her past captivity. Kane realized then that saving her once had only brought them here. And saving her again, this time not just from raiders but from the treachery of her own people, would demand everything he had. Every skill, every ounce of courage, every bit of heart. And he would not leave her side, not ever. As they fought their way deeper into the palace, Kane and Leora became more than allies. They became the last line of defense for a kingdom that depended on their unity, their courage, and the bond forged years ago in the shadow of death. And somewhere, deep in the corridors of power, the true mastermind watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and to test if the bond between the man and the princess could truly withstand the weight of betrayal. The palace had fallen silent, but the tension was thick enough to suffocate. Smoke lingered in the corridors, and the distant hum of alarms reminded Kane and Leora that danger was never far away. They had fought through raiders and traitors, but the true threat, the one who had orchestrated it all, remained unseen, like a shadow just beyond their vision. Leora's hand rested lightly on Kane's arm. Her eyes, glowing with determination, betrayed the slightest tremor of fear. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "The one behind all of this, he's close." Kane nodded. His instincts screamed danger, every hair on his body standing on end. He had faced enemies from countless worlds, but the cunning and patience of this adversary were unlike anything he had encountered. "He's been planning this for years," Kane said. "Someone who knows you, your past, even your survival." They reached the palace observatory, a vast chamber filled with golden light filtering through crystalline windows. The room overlooked the city, its streets alive with guards and civilians alike. And there at the center stood a figure Kane recognized immediately, Lord Serac, Leora's former mentor and closest advisor, the man she had trusted most. "Serac," Leora said, voice trembling with disbelief. "Why?" The man turned slowly, his expression calm, almost gentle, but his eyes were cold and unyielding. "Because survival is not enough, Princess," he said. "Power demands more. You were never meant to rise so quickly. You were weak once, and I helped you. But weakness cannot rule, and I will not allow your past to define the future of this kingdom." Kane stepped forward, protective and furious. "You betrayed her. You set the raiders against her. You betrayed your own people." Serac's gaze shifted to Kane, piercing and sharp. "I betrayed nothing. I merely ensured the galaxy does not suffer under her naive rule. You, a human, may see loyalty as simple, but you do not understand the burden of leadership here." Leora's chest heaved, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief coursing through her. "I trusted you. I believed in you. You've been a part of my life longer than anyone, and you've been orchestrating my destruction all along." Serac stepped closer, unafraid. "Yes, every threat you faced, every trial, I guided it, to make you stronger, to test you. But now I see it is not enough. You still cling to the man who saved you years ago. Your weakness will destroy this kingdom if you cannot let it go." Kane's hand tightened on the blaster at his side, his jaw clenching. "Leave her alone. She is not weak. She is stronger than you'll ever understand. And if you think you can manipulate her, you're wrong." Serac's lips curved into a faint, cruel smile. "Strength is measured in survival, Princess, and survival requires sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice him? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself?" For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Kane and Leora looked at each other, and the weight of years, battles, and unspoken bonds pressed down on them. The girl he had rescued once was no longer fragile, but she was still human, and she still needed him. "I am not weak," Leora said finally, her voice steady and commanding, radiating authority that silenced even Serac's smug confidence. "And I will not sacrifice the one who saved my life. Not then, not now, not ever." Kane felt a wave of warmth and purpose surge through him. The fear and doubt that had gnawed at him melted away, replaced by unwavering resolve. "She doesn't have to face this alone," he said. "And neither do I." Serac's eyes flickered, realizing his control was slipping. He lunged forward, energy blade igniting, but Kane and Leora moved as one. Kane intercepted the first strike with precise force, while Leora used her strategic mastery to disable Serac's other defenses. Every motion, every glance, every instinct between them was perfectly synchronized, born from years of trust, fear, and shared survival. Finally, Kane delivered a decisive blow, forcing Serac to retreat. Leora stepped forward, hand extended not in vengeance but in command. "Leave and never return." Serac hesitated, then vanished into the shadows, leaving behind the echoes of betrayal and the bitter lesson of power and trust. Kane lowered his weapon, breathing heavily, eyes on Leora. She turned to him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You stayed," she whispered. "Even when the world tried to tear me apart, you stayed." Kane shook his head, voice low but certain. "I promised, once years ago, and I'll promise it again, I won't leave, not ever." For the first time in years, Leora allowed herself to let down her walls completely. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the proof that some bonds were unbreakable, no matter how vast the galaxy, no matter how dark the betrayal. And Kane knew with certainty that this was not just a victory for survival or power. It was a triumph of trust, loyalty, and the bond forged between a man who once saved a girl and the woman who had become a queen, yet still needed him more than anyone could ever understand. Outside the observatory, the galaxy stretched vast and dangerous, but inside, two souls stood unshaken, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The first rays of dawn touched the palace spires, casting golden light across the city. The battle had ended, but the aftermath lingered like smoke in the air. Kane and Leora stood on the grand balcony, overlooking her kingdom. Below, citizens moved cautiously, some celebrating the survival of their queen, others still wary of the shadows that had threatened their world. Leora's emerald gown shimmered in the sunlight, her crown glowing faintly with the promise of authority regained. Yet her eyes, as they met Kane's, held something far deeper than power. They held vulnerability, gratitude, and a silent plea he could feel in his bones. "You stayed," she said softly, almost a whisper. "Even when it was dangerous, even when the galaxy itself seemed to conspire against us, you stayed." Kane's hand brushed hers, fingers entwining instinctively. "I told you," he replied, voice low but certain. "I don't leave the people I save, not once, not ever. And you're not just someone I saved, you're someone I could never abandon." She looked away briefly, letting the wind play with her hair, then returned her gaze to him. "I've spent years learning how to command armies, how to rule a kingdom, how to survive," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion. "But I've never learned how to live with hope, not until you came back." Kane felt the weight of her words, the depth of their shared history pressing against his heart. The girl he had rescued once was now a queen who commanded entire worlds, yet beneath the regal armor she was still human, still the one who had clung to him in terror years ago. And she needed him. A soft gust of wind carried the scent of alien blossoms across the balcony. Kane pulled her gently closer, just enough to close the distance their past had forced between them. "You'll never have to face the galaxy alone again," he promised. "Not while I'm here, not ever." Leora's eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of relief, love, and lingering fear. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay with me, not as a protector, not as a soldier, but as someone who belongs here, with me." Kane's chest tightened. This was more than a promise of protection. This was a promise of belonging, of trust, of life shared across stars and trials. He swallowed, meeting her gaze with all the sincerity he could summon. "I stay," he said simply. "Always." For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The sun rose higher, bathing them in golden light, and the distant city stirred with renewed hope. The palace, once threatened by betrayal and darkness, now stood as a symbol of resilience, courage, and the bond between a human and an alien princess who had once been a child in terror, and now was a queen who had chosen love over fear. Leora rested her forehead against his chest, allowing herself to finally exhale. Kane wrapped his arms around her, steady and unwavering, feeling the pulse of life and trust that had brought them back together. In that embrace, there was no past failure, no fear of the future, only a present filled with courage, connection, and the unspoken promise that neither would ever walk alone again. The galaxy outside was vast and dangerous, full of secrets and threats. But Kane and Leora no longer faced it as lone survivors. They faced it together, two hearts bound by fate, loyalty, and the unbreakable truth that sometimes the people we save shape not only our lives, but the destiny of entire worlds. And in the quiet, golden light of a new day, Kane realized something profound. Heroism was not just about saving lives in a moment of danger. It was about staying when it mattered most, about choosing love, loyalty, and hope over fear. He had rescued her once, now he would remain forever. And Princess Leora, standing tall beside him, finally allowed herself to believe that some promises could last beyond stars.